everybody. I'm Mike Curley.
It is Frank Curley.
And as I'm sure you're all aware, it's a special 25th anniversary, so we're going to tell you our own thoughts about a certain game that I'm sure you already are aware of because you watched the thumbnail.
Turok 2, obviously.
Yeah. So our story starts in Christmas 1998. I was 13.
And I was just turned 11.
Yeah, it was already a big year for gaming. Metal Gear Solid 1, Symphony Night, Turok.
Half-Life, a lot.
Yeah, it was
a lot came out.
A big year. And we had the kind of a semi-petty household console war where I had wanted an N64 previous year. Frank had wanted a PlayStation 1, and we ended up getting the latter, probably because of price and availability.
Yeah.
But there was one game that we needed in 1998. And that morning, among the gifts, was an N64 with Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and, of course, GoldenEye. And it was one of those weird situations where the TV in our bedroom only had the old RF switch.
Yeah.
So we ended up playing it in the living room and playing Ocarina of Time for the first time on the big screen.
Yes. Yeah, we were a Genesis household. We completely missed the SNES era, and we basically missed both Zelda games that came out during that era. Link to the Past, and then Link's Awakening, the original.
Yeah, we hadn't even had Game Boys. We had the old Tiger Electronics and a Nomad. So yeah, the last Zelda game we had played was Zelda 2. So this was bigger, lusher, more alive than any game we'd seen before. I mean, we played stuff like Tomb Raider, but this was different.
Come to think of it, I didn't really play any free exploration games at all since I played the crap out of the original Zelda.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of free exploration games just because hardware limitations, and we did not have a PC capable of playing anything bigger than StarCraft, really.
The SNES had more of them. There was Zelda, of course, but you also had Soul Blazer. And the like.
But for that generation of gaming, the Ocarina of Time was revolutionary on a gameplay front, with Z-targeting in particular being probably its most lasting contribution, where basically any game that attempts melee combat in 3D has to use something like it if it wants to succeed at all.
Attempts were made several times during that generation. Shooters were more common because that was just so hard to get down. You had Prince of Persia 3D, which the combat was terrible. So it made this kind of game, third-person action-adventure with melee combat, playable.
Yeah, it was famously inspired by a stage play the developers went to see, in which one character, I believe playing a ninja, hits a samurai with a chain, a Kusari-style chain, and they start moving around each other, and that way of being kind of tethered to the other character, making sure you're still facing them, that gave them the idea for what has turned out to be kind of the perfect way to do melee combat in a 3D space.
Yeah, and that had evolved, but the foundation was still there, having the camera not quite right behind your character. So in say, Elden Ring, the camera goes above you as the enemy gets closer. That basic setup still works to this day.
Yeah, and having the camera offset a little bit helps you as far as the range finding goes.
Depth perception, yeah.
And yeah, Elden Ring, any game with a lock on, even God of War, the newer ones, even the older God of War kind of had a soft lock on where your moves would turn a little bit. So yeah, that's... Other parts of the game have not aged super well. I mean, we've all seen the N64 controller, and I've tried playing it on Nintendo Switch Online with a Pro controller, and it's hell on muscle memory. Yeah. I keep firing off arrows when I'm trying to just move the camera.
Yeah, it was probably easier for me on the 3DS versus you on the Switch, because the 3DS initially does not have a right analog stick. There's an attachment you can buy, but that's it. So I wasn't used to it in the first place with this game, so it didn't really matter. The items were attached to buttons instead of a stick, instead of like the camera controls. To my surprise, and the last time I played it, it was kind of like when I was replaying a lot of Zelda games at the time, including Twilight Princess. It might be nostalgia, but I did end up enjoying Ocarina of Time more. And, you can call that nostalgia, but the fact that I was still able to enjoy it years later, despite how much it is aged, just goes to show how, unlike a lot of games of this era, it's still very playable.
Yeah, there is a timelessness to it, where it is very playable. The controls for the N64 controller are intuitive once you get back to it. I picked up a Switch N64 controller, and it feels good to play even now. Talked about enough about the technical aspects, but the other thing that makes Ocarina of Time, timeless, is it was in a lot of ways the first Zelda game, not just like, oh, this is the origin of Triforce and whatever, but it is, for a lot of kids, it might have been their first Zelda game, and it set the template for the games going forward. And just the list of iconic moments is, we could be here for an hour. We could just do a Let's Play of the game to run through the iconic moments. And we're not going to bother recapping the story because, one, if you're watching this, you probably already played the game. If you haven't, my dude, this is YouTube. There's at least a dozen videos recounting the story. If you can't find one, I don't know what to tell you.
Princess is kidnapped, go fight Ganondorf and get the princess back.
Broadly, yes.
Yeah, broadly.
Actually, no, she doesn't get kidnapped till the very end.
Yeah, fair. I mean, fair enough.
Yeah, so, one of those iconic moments is the first thing you see, the intro to the game. As soon as you put in your name, Link, or whatever you want to put in.
We played through this game a lot, so we came up with a lot of stupid names over the years.
So, and the intro, it hits you with a very wide range of emotions, with more cinematography than any Zelda game had done before because of the 3D.
Yeah. First, loneliness. You see Link alone, without a fairy and just isolated. Then the nightmarish vision of Ganondorf. And then, the very dire warning from the Deku Tree to Navi, before she sets up. And then you have, Then finally the emotion lifts, and you have the wonder of flying through that first village for the first time. She runs into a wall, like very.
Yeah, she's flying around. It's a very light sequence, and kind of shows off the power of the N64, such that it was because it's all there's nothing pre-rendered. It's just the camera flying through all the characters.
Yeah, and despite. And then, of course, we have the first meeting of Link and Navi, one of the few people actually bothers to visit him.
Yeah. I mean, he has friends. There's Saria. It's really just Mido who's a jerk. But, and then you get, of course, the tutorial. But it doesn't really feel overly long or gratuitous. It's maybe you're half an hour getting used to the controls, and it feels like a playground. Yeah. Which is kind of the point. He is a child here, surrounded by other children, or childlike beings, whatever the Kokiri are. They're wood people later. But there is a certain amount of innocence where the worst thing he has to worry about is Mido being a jerk to him. It's like very playground, elementary school level drama.
Yeah, and I think what helps is that you're constantly interacting. It's other Zelda games have had like a lot of dialogue. A lot just kind of, little fetch quests like here and there. But here it just kind of like cuts you loose in this small area. Yeah,
it is kind of a playground, a short preview of what you're going to be doing the rest of the game. In a way we'll get into in a bit later, it is kind of mirrored when you hit into the adult world. But, shortly after you get that loss of innocence with the Deku Tree, where that is kind of like the first time Link has... seen any kind of consequence in his world. He's a 10-year-old.
Yeah, and his actions have... Well, he didn't cause the decay of the Deku Tree, but he was still part of it.
Yeah, there is definitely a loss of innocence and growing up there, and then you step out into Hyrule Field, and I mean, anybody watching this under the age of about 25 is not going to get that this was the open world for us.
Yeah, just think about a 23-year-old. They probably came to age around like Oblivion. Oh, I say came of age. They were 5 or 6. Their first memories were like Oblivion, one of the bigger open world games. And even a few years before that, you had Morrowind. And long story short, we are already up to our ears in open world games at this point, to put it mildly.
Yeah. But on 1998, unless you had a PC, this was probably the biggest set of open space that you got to play around in. That wasn't just like a bare bones JRPG overworld where you were just getting to the next town and getting random encounters. Like, there was stuff to do in Hyrule Field, stuff to see. And even for an N64 game, the distance you could see was like further than you could in Tomb Raider, or even games that came out later like Soul Reaver, that depended on like you need to fog things up. Like, you could get to the highest point in Hyrule Field and you could see the edges of it. You could see the castle, the ranch. Even if you start running, the second that owl shuts up, you're going to get to the castle gates like a few seconds too late to get into it. And I think that's deliberate. It ensures that the first time, for one thing, it ensures that the first time you see the inside of Castletown is morning, when it's in its lively glory and everybody's running around. There's cheery music, Malin is there singing. But it also makes sure that before you get to that, you experience like the nighttime in Hyrule Field when the Stowell children pop up. And it helps you appreciate, okay, the castle gates mean safety. Inside of town means safety. If you're out in the wild, you're going to get attacked. It's kind of like a miniature preview of what happens when you jump to the adult timeline. And the next thing is, you go through the Spiritual Stone quests, you get to meet the Gorons and the Zora, and then you pull the Master Sword, and just like the lush, vibrant Hyrule Field turned into a dark, dangerous land at night, the once lively Castletown is just a zombie wasteland. It's like the music's gone, castle's gone. The people they're there, but not quite as friendly as they used to be. It is very much going, welcome to adulthood, kid.
Yeah. So we get from the loss of innocence to the beginning, and just you slowly just inherit a world that's oppressed.
Yeah, it is very much a game about growing up, and in a lot of ways, growing up too fast. In the process of getting the Master Sword, after Zelda has fled, you can find in one of the back alleys a guard who, he's leaning against the wall, he's sitting, and he's like talking very slowly, and you talk to him, and then like he dies.
Yeah.
And Link is just like, the only comment that he has is like, oh, he's not moving anymore. And that's like, I mean, it is a little weird that he's like maybe 12 feet away from the people still jumping around and haggling at Hyrule Market. But it is very much, again, that loss of innocence of like, Link is experiencing death for the first time and growing up far faster than he should have been. And, if you go toward the castle in the adult timeline, the bright white castle is gone, and the ominous floating castle of Ganondorf, unreachable and intimidating, is sitting there. And you leave the town, the bridge that closed to ensure the safety is broken in the moat.
Yeah.
It is very much a dead town, and it is a wake-up call.
Yeah.
As you go through, of course, you see there is, of course, life still. There's Kakariko Village.
Yeah.
And you solve all the other problems. And speaking of Kakariko Village, is the other...
Oh, yeah. What always stands out to me is just how downright horrifying both the well and the Shadow Temple are.
Yeah, the well, especially that you have to face it as a child, it's as if the terror is reducing Link to a child again. It's we've all had that moment of you're frightened and you feel like a kid again in the bad way of you feel small and helpless, and then there's the dead hand.
See, there's a phrase I hear a lot. It's either, man, this is dark for Disney, or man, this is dark for Nintendo. I feel like a lot of people forget how dark these games can get. I mean, the first big Disney movie, Snow White, the witch is crushed by a boulder, and there are these two vultures smiling and just quietly lifting off and going to where the disaster is. And this is what separates, this kind of fiction from like just, kiddie stuff. Like your absolute like rated G moments. Keep in mind, your uncle dies, within the first 10 minutes of Link to the Past. If you die in Zelda 2, they're using your blood to resurrect Ganondorf. Nintendo always had a good talent for, balancing, its darker moments without getting gratuitous about it.
Yeah, even in Wind Waker, there is some horrifying moments there. There is some darkness there. And yeah, this is very much... It is not out of tone with the rest of the game, necessarily.
Yeah.
And, it does speak to, maybe the first half of the game is bright and cheery and a kid's adventure.
But keep in mind, we start alone and with nightmares.
Yeah, alone with nightmares. And one of the first things you learn after being the adult is there's talk about the Civil War that happened shortly before the game.
Yeah.
And I think the Shadow Temple in particular has a lot of implications for how that war was conducted.
Yeah.
And, this is supposedly a place the good guys, the Hyrule King, would have been in charge of, or at least his agents. And, the place kind of speaks for itself. It is a prison. It is an execution chamber, possibly a torture chamber. So there is very much the implication that for all that it is heroic fantasy, there is a darkness there. And I think, again, it's going back to the theme of growing up. There are things as you grow up, you look back as a kid and you see, oh, no, there was something bad going on here that you didn't have context for when you were a 10-year-old, but when you grow up, you learn what really happened. And then, of course, there is Ganondorf's Tower and the finale of the game. And it's interesting to note that the initial concept of the game, before they really started working on it, was that it was going to take place entirely in Ganondorf's castle. It was going to be structured the same way Mario 64 was with Peach. And that last mini dungeon gauntlet is kind of like the last remnant of that.
The funny thing is, that sounds more like Metroidvania.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Symphony of Night came out that year, so the phrase Metroidvania wasn't even a thing. Or maybe was even just starting to be a thing when this thing was released. Yeah,
and there is a certain amount of overlap, even in the older games, where it's like, okay, you get this item, it opens up the map. You get this ability, it opens up the map.
Well, I would say Zelda and Metroid are two flavors of a very similar thing, where Metroid is about corridors, where Zelda was always about open fields and then pockets of dungeons.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more of a structural thing, really.
Yeah.
But
it's very similar in how you progress.
Yeah. So once you clear those challenges and you start climbing, one of the best touches in the tower is Ganondorf's theme is rising in volume as you get closer. It's not just the theme of the tune, or the theme of the dungeon. It is a diegetic reminder of what you're up against, and it's building and building until you get up there. And of course, the man's playing his own damn theme tune.
Yeah.
Which, interesting, it means that all three of them are musicians to some extent. Link's got the ocarina, Zelda and Sheik has the ocarina and the harp, and he's playing the organ. You just need someone on drums, and they got a little band going.
One of the Gorons.
Yeah.
Well, starting in the next game, but still.
Yeah. So that's like kind of the first time you see the three iconic trio is all together, and they're even arranged in a triangle the way they frame it.
Yeah.
And the fight against Ganondorf would be, a fine epic final showdown in its own right. You're playing tennis with his energy blasts, using your bow and hook shot, and using a lot of the tools that you've come up with to fight him. And then, you do take him down. He's coughing up blood or green stuff, depending on which version.
Yeah, and side note, again, the blood represents, it is indicative of Nintendo and how they're able to balance tone. Like in the later versions with the green blood, it's nothing.
Yeah, it's not as visceral. It
looks silly. Like I played on the 3DS and I saw it, I was like,
Yeah, you understand a little bit of why they did it, but I think it is better with the blood because, you're hitting them with a sword. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and what's important for me that it's the moment he feels powerless. Like he's no longer this god king ruling over with his magic powers. He's coughing up blood. He is just for all his power, he is just a mortal.
Yeah, he has met his match, and he's been brought down, and he tries to take you with him, of course.
Yeah.
And then you have to escape the tumbling tower, which is another iconic sequence. That the game could have just ended with Ganondorf going down, but Link and Zelda, they escape, they get out just in time, no matter how much time is actually on the counter. But then they hear a sound, and Link turns to investigate, and it's not over. Ganondorf rises, enraged, like he's not even talking anymore. He's just being kept alive by his stolen power, and he transforms.
Yeah, into no subtitle, just simply Ganon.
Yeah, every other boss has a little description, a brief snippet to tell you what about them, but this is just Ganon. Yeah. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, he needs no other introduction. And thinking back on this fight in particular, it makes me realize when Ganondorf was won, he was in control and using was plotting, scheming, and then everything fell apart with his defeat from Link, and now he is just lashing out. Meanwhile, you're the one that has to think around this fight against Ganon, and he's kind of easy, but it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, he is at this point, like, he knocks away the Master Sword, so yeah, you do have to kind of strategize a little bit. But yeah, it's not hard. He is basically at this point a pissed off wild animal.
Yeah.
A beast. Just trying to, like, his plan is done. It's not about the plan, it's about getting revenge at this point. And the tone of the fight, the lighting, the music, the scene is lit only by the dying fires of his castle and the occasional lightning strike. And, this is the epic confrontation that you've been building up to the entire game.
Yeah. And I thinking back on it, I don't think you get a good look at his face until the end. So he's basically just this silhouette with bright eyes, and these two swords in hand. And it's another thing that the 3DS kind of screws up on. It's very bright. You see him, and just seeing him sit there is kind of silly.
Yeah,
he doesn't like you're seeing the whole monster. You're seeing the whole thing behind the curtain, and it's just like I think it was just trying to show off what the 3DS can do, but in doing that, it kind of misses why this was such an atmospheric fight in the first place.
Yeah, in the original, like you said, the only clear view you get of him is once you've beaten him. Where before he's a big black shadow lit by lightning and fire, and then it's only once he's brought low that you get a look at him, and it takes away from the intimidating factor.
Yeah,
and I think it's like when you finally see the alien, you finally see Jaws. It's not as scary once you see it.
Yeah, and Ganon's just down there as a pathetic wounded animal.
Yeah, and you don't even get to put him down. You get to put him away for a while.
Yeah. I mean, you do stab him in the head.
Yeah, but even then, he's he gets sealed and keeps coming back, and that kind of brings us to the game's legacy. And
where to even start? Wow.
Well, it kind of sets the foundation for just about every 3D game in the series up to Breath of the Wild.
And even then, you still see the foundations there. The lock on and everything else.
Yeah, I'm talking more story-wise and format-wise, where the Wind Waker is similar.
Get item,
you get the items.
Area.
Yeah. Twilight Princess, in some ways, might as well be a remake of it.
It's kind of like Super Metroid to Metroid.
Yeah, very much so, where the graphics are better, the interface is cleaned up.
You don't have the time, but bigger.
You don't have the time travel But yeah, it is in a lot of ways a very similar game. Down to even I think even that you start with Forest, Goron, Zoras before you get the Master Sword. And it also introduced Ganondorf, who kind of becomes the face of villainy for the series. You know, Ganondorf, I think, at this point is more well-known than the monstrous form Ganon. It's Ganondorf is the guy. The monster is Ganondorf. It's like how you know more about Sephiroth than his various monster boss forms.
But I will say, okay, obviously Ganondorf has evolved in characterization over the years, but I don't feel that they ever topped that Ganon fight, personally.
Well,
that's just my opinion on it.
There's a game. There's a game you haven't played yet that might.
We'll see about that, but at least up until Tears of the Forest, Tears of the Kingdom, excuse me. Up until that, like Puppet Gen from Wind Waker, I hardly even registered.
Yeah, because it is a puppet. It is not him. He's not even there.
Yeah,
but the Ganondorf fight in that is one of the best.
Yeah. But yeah, I always feel just an atmosphere and presentation, it's like, I played through Breath of the Wild, it's like, yeah, the Pig Ganon thing is pretty, big, but I don't know, it just...
Yeah, that's not even really a boss fight, that's a denouement, if anything.
Yeah. I like the idea of Ganon in Breath of the Wild as just kind of like this, chaotic force that no one has been able to even get close to.
Yeah, it is more of it's basically a hurricane with tusks.
Yeah, he's a force
in the
of
middle
nature.
Of the place.
Yeah,
but yeah, and the game's also Sheik. While Sheik has not shown up in the spin-off since, the idea of Link having a peer, sometimes Zelda herself, sometimes someone else. That's kind of stuck around. Tetra is kind of an evolution on the Sheik idea.
Din and Nehru from the Oracle games are sort of that.
Yeah, just kind of giving Link someone his own age to talk to once in a while.
Yeah.
Whereas in a lot of the other games, he's very much alone. Like Link, the Link in the first two games doesn't really have anybody. Nobody who really knows he's on this mission.
Yeah.
Same with A Link to the Past. He's got the psychic, the guy in psychic communication, Zelda's advisor, whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it is always very much him, but Sheik kind of provides somebody who knows a little bit more than Link, a little bit of a guide, and also like a little bit of a partner in certain respects. And it also kind of set the template as far as having a core gameplay gimmick, like the Ocarina, which, you could see its clear inspiration in the Wind Waker, the Harp and Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, you had the Howling.
Yeah.
But just kind of a tool or something that the game is built around.
Yeah.
And of course, going forward, this is where the infamous timeline split happens.
Which is a whole video's worth of
Yeah, we're not going
stuff.
to explain it, but it does kind of create a structure for explaining what's going on. I personally tend to look at the games as just each game is a legend in its own right.
Yeah.
Kind of retelling the same frame story to a different audience.
Yeah, and I think Shigeru Miyamoto would just prefer if they were all self-contained.
Yeah, and you don't need to play another Zelda game to get the one that just came out.
Yeah, it's fun if you know, but you don't really need to.
Yeah. What does this mean for us? I mean, for me, like we said, we played the first two games, and we skipped the SNES generation. But since this game, I've made it a point to play through every console Zelda game. Like, I had enjoyed the NES titles, even though I never finished them. But this is the game that made it my favorite series. It's not a complicated game, it's not a complicated story, but it is a simple, well-told tale of courage, overcoming fear, and unchecked power, and it's about growing up. And every Zelda game is much more than the synopsis of its plot. This is about the passage of time, looking back on one's childhood and going forward. It's kind of appropriate that I'm as we're recording this, last night was my 20-year high school reunion.
Wow.
And that kind of puts into perspective the effect that time has on your memories, on your relationships, on the world in general. And what Ocarina of Time, what it says to me is that moving forward and a loss of innocence, that doesn't mean that you stop fighting, you stop trying to be better, that you stop trying to make the world a better place around you. And as a famous gardener once said, and I think this game kind of echoes and reminds me, is there's good in this world and it's worth fighting for.
Now, as for me, I was 11 at the time, and having two older brothers, I had a lot of older brother getting through the hard part, or at least the complicated part. Now, which was kind of odd since I had beaten like all 3 Crash Bandicoot games at that point. I don't exactly say they were easier than the Zelda games, especially going back to them now. But it was kind of, I was also shedding away, cheat codes and like really, taking away the safety net, in games. Difficulties were finally starting to get, not murderously difficult like they were in the previous generations. But it was a slow learning curve, but by like the second or third playthrough, I was getting through that on my own. Between this, Perfect Dark, and GoldenEye, those were like kind of the 3 games that made me really just embrace the challenge and accept what was given to me. Besides difficulty, though, it was a game about exploration and finding things that maybe didn't matter to your progress or to your power or anything like that, but you're glad it's around. One specific grotto in mind is the forest stage. Now, some people might have missed it, and I don't blame you for it. In the strategy guide, it shows like a map of this part of the Lost Woods, just this, oh, there's a grotto here in the high grass, if you want to check it out. And it does not elaborate beyond that. What I was not expecting was a mask contest where you're on stage in front of a kind of Deku scrub that doesn't show up anywhere else in the game. It's a bizarre little corner of the game that it didn't strictly need, but I'm glad it's there, and I wouldn't have the game without it. And more to the point, this is a game about constantly, that I constantly traveled around for exploring's sake. I just love finding things like little things like Malin singing in the middle of the night, when you're adult Link, where I had a plan of maybe getting Epona out of there in the middle of the night, but then I find her singing there, and just going, don't tell Ingo I'm singing it. And at that point I was like, all right, no, we're not doing the sneaky way. I'm gonna piss that guy off. And how the gossip stones that we mentioned before jettison into space after you hit it with a bomb. And I don't mean physics engine. You put a bomb next to it, it explodes, and then it does its own countdown and rockets up into the sky. Nowadays, MMOs are guilty of this, especially, but a lot of games, especially like Ubisoft sandbox, is a player going, what's my award for doing this? And to all those details, barely any. And this isn't a game about constantly getting pluses. This isn't a game about leveling up, replacing your armor every 10 feet. This is about finding these little details. And that really is its own reward. And I feel like games like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring do a much better of capturing that part of exploration than a lot of those other sandboxes. People will know fans will know what I'm talking about when I'm saying like Necron City, where you're underground, and you look up into like this ceiling of stone stars, and this big temple over this giant river. You don't have an explanation for it. All you have is speculation, but finding it just makes it so satisfying in and of itself. And if you're going to do like a sandbox game, if you're going to do a big open world thing, please remember that little detail, that fundamental part of why we like exploring in the first place.
Yeah, a big part of exploring in games is that you won't find everything, that the game won't point everything out to you. And yeah, Ocarina of Time was kind of the first game that did that for us.
Yeah. Like, I didn't know about the fourth stage the first, 5 times I went through this game.
Yeah.
I was like, what the hell is this?
And I just remember having beaten it the first time. It's the only game where I immediately deleted my save file so I could do it all over again.
Yeah, I think Elden Ring is like one of the few games where I really felt like that. It was very tempting to go back to it, and now I'm back to it, so...
So that's our spiel on Ocarina of Time, a game that is still one of my favorites. I've been replaying it again, partly for this video, and it still holds up. So
and just like a lot of the moments, like the Ganon fight and like the intro and everything like that. Difficulty, leveling up, whatever. Those scenes are just worth it in and of themselves.
So I've been Mike Curley.
This is Frank Curley.
Have a good one.
Happy holidays.